When we pack for a trip, we usually think about sunscreen, adapters, and maybe a phrasebook. We picture the glossy postcard version of our destination. But there is an entirely different map out there, one that does not show historical landmarks or top-rated restaurants, but rather the invisible fault lines of a society. Today, we are looking at the realities behind the travel brochures. We are taking a journey through the most populous countries on every single continent to uncover the hidden risks travelers face, from street-level scams to deep-rooted systemic inequalities.
It is a fascinating perspective because the risks we face when we cross borders are rarely just about bad luck. They are almost always a mirror reflecting a country's internal struggles. When a tourist experiences a spiked rate of petty theft or encounters a corrupt official, they are briefly stepping into the daily reality of the locals. We are going to unpack what that looks like across the globe, not to scare anyone away from traveling, but to fundamentally change how we understand the places we visit.
Exactly. It is about traveling with your eyes wide open. Let us start with a place that often tops bucket lists but carries some intense contrasts. South America, and specifically Brazil. The imagery is always vibrant: carnival, beaches, the Amazon. But the security reality is incredibly complex.
Absolutely. Brazil is a textbook example of how extreme, normalized inequality directly fuels security risks. You have these ultra-wealthy neighborhoods sitting right next to favelas, which are often controlled by powerful organized crime factions. For a tourist, the primary threat is street-level crime. We are talking about armed robberies, aggressive pickpocketing, and mass beach robberies. But you cannot separate that crime from the socio-economic divide. When millions are marginalized and the wealth gap is that stark, crime becomes a parallel economy.
It is like a pressure cooker. As a visitor, you might be sipping a cocktail in a highly policed tourist bubble, but that bubble is fragile. If you take a wrong turn, you are suddenly in a zone where the state essentially has no monopoly on security.
That is the perfect way to phrase it. The spillover effect is real. And it is not just the crime itself, it is the complication of corruption. If you run into trouble and need the police, the pervasive corruption at multiple levels can make reporting a crime an ordeal in itself. The system that is supposed to protect you can sometimes be a hurdle.
Which brings us to another continent where corruption and inequality shape the landscape: Africa. Looking at Nigeria, the most populous nation there, the risk profile shifts into something even more systemic.
Nigeria presents a very elevated risk profile across almost all categories. You have vibrant culture and massive economic potential, especially in the oil-rich south, but the regional disparity is staggering. The risks there are less about a teenager snatching your phone and more about organized banditry, kidnapping for ransom, and regional insurgencies. Plus, the corruption is highly visible. A traveler might face demands for bribes right at a police checkpoint. It is a place where impunity is common. And that trickles down to every single interaction.
And we have to mention the health risks there too. The data shows a heavy global burden of HIV and other health concerns in the region. It is a stark reminder that travel safety isn't just about avoiding bad neighborhoods. It is about understanding the public health landscape. Medical infrastructure varies wildly, and a casual decision can have lifelong consequences.
That is a crucial point. Whether it is Nigeria, where national prevalence is high, or even urban party scenes in Brazil, the health risks are a silent threat. Travelers often operate in this vacation mindset where they feel invincible, but biology does not care that you are on holiday. Unprotected encounters or unregulated medical procedures carry serious weight in these environments.
Let us pivot to Asia. India is the most populous country in the world now. The sensory experience of traveling there is legendary, but so is the chaos. How does the risk profile look when you have nearly 1.5 billion people navigating deep historical hierarchies?
India is fascinating because the violent crime rate against tourists is actually relatively low compared to places like Brazil. The real risks in India are street-level theft, elaborate scams, and what you might call the tourist tax, the relentless overcharging or minor bribery expected in bureaucratic situations. But the philosophical layer here is the accepted inequality. You are constantly confronted with extreme poverty, the remnants of the caste system, and stark gender divides.
I imagine that visibility of poverty can be deeply jarring for a first-time visitor. It manifests in aggressive begging or just the sheer density of human struggle right outside a luxury hotel. It forces you to confront your own privilege on a daily basis.
It does, and it also ties into targeted risks. While typical tourists might not face hate crimes, the underlying religious and communal tensions are always simmering. If you are a solo female traveler, the deep-seated gender norms can translate into harassment. You are navigating a society where the rules of personal space and social hierarchy are completely different from what you might be used to in the West.
It makes you wonder about the places that are heavily surveilled. Like China, for instance. It is the second most populous, yet the street-level experience is vastly different from India.
Completely different. In China, the heavy surveillance and strict crackdowns mean that organized gang violence or violent street crime is incredibly low. You might encounter some petty theft in a crowded subway, but generally, you are physically very safe. However, the risk there is much more opaque.
You mean the institutional risks?
Exactly. The risks are tied to the state and societal shifts. There is occasional xenophobia, especially during health crises, and the inequality is hidden behind a system that divides urban residents from rural migrant workers. You do not see the sprawling slums like in other developing nations, but the social divides are just as deep, dictated by policy rather than organic urban sprawl.
That is a brilliant contrast. It shows that safety is a spectrum. Physical safety from muggers is one thing, but freedom from arbitrary state action or systemic discrimination is another. Speaking of which, let us look at Europe. Russia is the most populous there, and its risk profile seems heavily weighted toward those institutional and targeted threats.
Russia is a prime example of targeted vulnerability. For a standard tourist staying in central Moscow, the main annoyance might just be pickpockets. But if you belong to the LGBTQ community, or if you are a visible minority, the threat level spikes dramatically. The laws themselves are restrictive, and hate crimes or xenophobic attacks are a documented reality. Add to that the endemic corruption where a gift might be expected to resolve a bureaucratic hiccup, and you have a landscape where the rules feel extremely arbitrary.
It is almost like the infrastructure of the state itself is the hazard, rather than just individuals on the street. It is a sobering thought. But let us bring it closer to home for many of our listeners. The United States. North America's giant. We often think of the global north as the safe zone, but the data tells a slightly different story, doesn't it?
It really does. And it is a paradox that puzzles many international visitors. The United States has generally excellent infrastructure, low street-level corruption, you are not going to be asked for a bribe at a traffic stop, and strong institutions. But it also has significant, localized gang violence tied to drugs, and a uniquely high rate of gun violence for a developed nation.
And the inequality is right there on the sidewalk. The homelessness in major cities like Los Angeles or San Francisco is something that shocks a lot of tourists.
Precisely. The US has normalized an incredible level of wealth disparity. You have gleaming tech hubs surrounded by tent cities. For a tourist, unless you wander into specific high-risk neighborhoods, the violent crime risk is low. But the petty crime, smash and grabs from rental cars, pickpocketing in tourist hubs is very common. And we cannot ignore the spikes in hate crimes in polarized areas. It is a highly fragmented society, and the safety map literally changes from block to block.
It is a patchwork quilt of safety. You cross a street and the statistics completely change. What about Oceania? Australia is the major player there. I assume the risks are quite different from everything we have discussed so far.
Australia is arguably the safest on our list for a typical traveler. Corruption is very low, violent gang activity rarely touches tourists, and street crime is minimal compared to global peers. But even there, perfection is an illusion. There are deep socio-economic gaps, particularly affecting indigenous communities, It is a systemic issue involving health, incarceration rates, and access to services. Tourists might not feel the impact of this directly, but it is the defining inequality of the continent.
It seems no matter how developed a nation is, there is always a shadow. Even if that shadow does not directly threaten a tourist's wallet, it threatens the moral fabric of the place they are visiting. I have to ask, just to complete the map, what about Antarctica?
Well, unless you consider an aggressive penguin a street-level threat, Antarctica is the exception. There is no permanent population, no government to be corrupt, and no societal inequality. The risks are entirely environmental, extreme cold, and the logistical nightmare of a medical evacuation. It is the only place on Earth where human nature isn't the primary hazard.
A literal blank slate. It is funny, but it perfectly highlights our main point. As soon as you add human society to a landscape, you add complexity, hierarchy, and friction.
That is the ultimate takeaway. Crime, corruption, and health risks are not random anomalies. They are symptoms of a society's underlying conditions. When you travel, you are not just walking through a museum. You are walking through a living, breathing ecosystem of human struggle and triumph.
So, how should we, as travelers, process all this? It feels a bit heavy to pack all this societal awareness next to our sunglasses.
It shouldn't be a burden. It should be an awakening. Use common sense, do not flash valuables, research the neighborhoods, get travel insurance, and understand the local health landscape. But, more importantly, travel with empathy. When you see aggressive begging, understand the systemic failure behind it. When you face a frustrating bureaucratic delay, recognize the institutional history that caused it. Plus, it transforms you from a passive consumer of a destination into an engaged global citizen.
That is beautifully said. It changes the question from asking if you will be safe to asking what this place is trying to tell you. We leave our footprints in these countries, but their realities should leave an imprint on us too. It makes the world feel a lot more connected and, honestly, a lot more fragile. Thank you for taking us on this incredible journey across the continents.
It was a pleasure. The world is a complex place, but understanding it is the first step to truly experiencing it.
To everyone listening, the next time you book a flight, look beyond the itinerary. The real journey begins where the tourist map ends. Stay curious, stay safe, and keep questioning the world around you.